What is going on, y'all? I'm KM Best, and Second Dinner just announced the patch notes for April 18th. We are looking at some major shakeups to the metagame, and I think I'm super excited for what comes next. So first things first, what are the actual changes? Well, Shuri will now only buff the cards at the location she is played in. What this will do is prevent Cosmo from being a playable card with her for the most part. So you now can't go Cosmo into Shuri, dump a Red Skull in the Cosmo lane, because now you have to dump it into the Shuri lane, and of course Cosmo turns off Shuri. Now, this is a big deal because I think one of the big things that felt really bad about the current Shuri deck is that you didn't really have the ability to counterplay anything, and that is super, super important for like giving your opponents the chance to actually play the game. One other thing that this sort of telegraphed play does is if you have priority as the Shuri player, suddenly you're very vulnerable to Shang-Chi, and one of the major snap conditions, especially in Shuri mirrors, was to play for getting priority, then playing Shuri, then doing everything that you normally would be doing. So that is definitely something that has more obvious counterplay now, because if you have priority and you tell them you are playing a big card into this lane, they're going to Shang-Chi it. Now, you could still play for the She-Hulk line. That's definitely worth considering. I still think the She-Hulk version of this play is very powerful, but of course that She-Hulk play is a little bit vulnerable to Leech. We'll get to that one later though, because the next nerf that we want to talk about is that Leech is now going to be a card that, instead of having an on reveal effect that does the Leech thing, gets rid of all the abilities, is going to be a card that only happens at the beginning of turn 6. He has to be on the board. He happens at the beginning of turn 6. He is not ongoing, so he should just be able to work no matter what. This is an upside and downside. It's obviously a downside in the context of the Lockjaw decks. We'll get to that later. Because now you're not ripping him early. You're no longer doing things like Time Stone into Leech. The early Leeches were the most unfair Leech. Now he's a fair card again. I do think that the fact that he just can't be turned off by anything is a little bit of an upside. He is extremely telegraphed. Now, I don't think that necessarily means he's bad. Definitely still a card worth considering in terms of playability. Now, I think the most major change this patch is that Lockjaw now only works once per turn. This is a huge, huge nerf to the Thanos Lockjaw archetype. I think it makes the deck a lot harder to work. In fact, all of my Thanos lists post-nerf do not involve the card Lockjaw. I do think that this was sort of inevitable. When you have a card like Lockjaw that creates free stuff out of nothing, it does end up being broken as soon as there's a card like Thanos in the game. People like to talk about design space. I think that actually is a legitimate design space concern in terms of like, how do we ever make cards that make disposable units? We just have to make sure that they can't go into a Lockjaw ever, or they will be abused in the way the Thanos Lockjaw decks were abusing people. Now, the final change that they made is one that I'm a little scared about. I'm a little scared about this. I am very scared, I'll be honest. I'm a little more than a little scared. Leader has gone from a 6/7 to a 6/2, and in exchange, he has gained the ability to copy the strongest card your opponent plays. Now, to me, this screams that they should be playing Leader in Wave and in Sandman shells. That seems like absolutely, utterly unbeatable. Imagine playing Electro into Sandman, into Leader, into Odin. Brutal. Just an incredible combination of cards there. Like, that is so hard to deal with. And I think you already want to run Odin in a lot of those lists. It's definitely going to be a question as to what one of those lists will rise to the top, but I definitely think one of them will. I think this is a big boost to Sandman. I think it is potentially a big boost to Doomwave as well. There was one other change, I guess technically two. Jubilee will now pull from the top of the deck again, and America Chavez will now sit on the bottom of the deck rather than going to the top. So she is functionally the same. Those cards will functionally work the same. There was originally in the beta, Chavez sat on top of your deck, and Jubilee would basically always pull her, or very often pull her. They changed Jubilee to pull a random card. Now they are reverting her back to her original text. I assume because they are working on some future synergy for off of the top of the deck. We know cards like Howard the Duck and Iron Lad interact with the top of the deck, so definitely bringing Jubilee back to that text box gives her some utility in lists like that might use those cards. As far as Chavez, she's the same. She just gets hits by Yondu less. That's pretty much it. So let's jump into the 8 decks that I have to showcase today, because I've got decks for y'all. Let's check them out. So first up is a post-nerf Shuri deck. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. We're not actually sure how good this list is going to be, especially in the context of the more viable counterplay to it and the likely presence of a decent amount of Shang-Chi's. Now, we are still playing armor in this Sauron Shuri list, and I'm not even positive this is the right way to go with Sauron Shuri. There's definitely an argument for the other build of it, using Moon Girl, Black Bolt, Stature, and generally trying to explode wide after playing a Shuri and using Sauron to do that. Now, one thing that you'll notice in this list is we are running America Chavez. The reason I've opted for America Chavez, to be clear, this is a flex slot. The reason I've opted for America Chavez is because I want to draw Sauron really badly. I hate playing Ebony Maw if I'm not playing Sauron. I love playing Ebony Maw if I am playing Sauron. Obviously, I want to draw Sauron. Obviously, I want to draw Shuri. I think having 2 cards that you just like really desperately want to have does take it over the top for us in terms of wanting to play America Chavez in this list, but there are plenty of other options you can swap in. You can play like Kang the Conqueror. You can kind of play whatever you want in that spot. I have gone for the Chavez because I'm a bit of a Chavez truther, but that is absolutely a flex spot, and there definitely are arguments against it. One final note is I'm really not confident in the Sunspot. I have him in here as a sort of, I guess, deference to the idea that I suspect that there's going to be a lot more Shuri on 4 into She-Hulk Taskmaster on 6 than there was previously. I don't have any real basis for that, but in those lines, I think Sunspot is going to be a little bit better than the alternatives, such as Iceman. You could talk me into Iceman, though. You could really talk me into Iceman here. Next up is a deck that terrifies me. This is the new Sandman Leader. Horrifying. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. It's the scariest thing in the world to me. I am not a fan of cards like Sandman that sort of restrict your ability to play the game, and Sandman into Leader just seems like an absolute nightmare if you're already reasonably on the board. Like, if you go something like Wave or Electro into Sandman, end up doing like Leader Odin, just gross. Obviously, the Electro one allows you to do much more gross stuff. Leader Odin is only going to happen after an Electro, but even something like, Wave into Sandman, into Devil Dinosaur, into Leader, I don't really know what your opponent is supposed to do about that, especially with Leader's new text box. Like, this is some scary stuff. Like, it answers the questions that it asks, right? Leader asks you, can you play a lot of cards this turn? And Sandman says, no, you can't. And then Sandman asks the question of, can you go bigger than me? And then Leader says, no, you can't. They go together. It's peanut butter and jelly here. This is something that terrifies me. I do think it's going to be around. I actually feel bad putting in the video because I don't want to play against it. There's a bunch of fun stuff to play. And I should point out that if this does become the new meta tyrant, one deck that I think it might actually not be very good into is Shuri. So Shuri, of course, can play Red Skull into Taskmaster, go bigger than you. Because of the way Taskmaster interacts with Leader, the way it'll work is Taskmaster will trigger on whatever card you as the Leader player played before Leader, and you're not going to get that 24 power Taskmaster because that on reveal is going to go off for you. So I do think that Shuri might actually be in a position where it's the good guy against a list like this. That is a little bit horrifying to say, a little bit crazy, but I am kind of glad they didn't demolish Shuri, because if this stuff starts becoming the thing to do, Shuri is like exactly this break glass in case of emergency. I'm going to go taller than you. Exactly the kind of card you want to be playing against a list like this. Another option, of course, would be the Gunny Patriot list. Patriot generally pretty damn good into Sandman. As long as you end up finishing up with an Ultron, you go Patriot, Mystique, Leech, Ultron, we're good. Like, we're good. We only need to play one card a turn. That's another list that could end up rising up if this list becomes a truly dominant meta tyrant. Next up is Thanos. Lockjaw's gone. Lockjaw's out of my lists now. We're playing the Thanos lane control list. I believe this list was made by Lelouch de Gaulle. It's like one card off from the list that I talked about in my original top 8 deck list thing about a month ago. Now, this new card, of course, is Hitmonkey. It has replaced Daredevil. We're now just using our big brain to Daredevil people. I don't know, like, your mileage may vary on this. If you prefer the power of Hitmonkey versus the precision of Daredevil, that's your call. I have the Hitmonkey in there right now. I think this is a very solid list for targeting specific lanes. I do worry that, you are kind of playing a decent amount of cards on the last turn. There is some Sandman weakness here, but a card like Valkyrie, especially with what we expect to be a decrease in the amount of Cosmos. I've been a Valkyrie truther for a while. She just entered Pool 3. I'm very excited for that. Next up is a deck that did not get nerfed and was already good. This deck was piloted by What Am I to second place in the Snap Fan Open. Now, he identified both Carnage and Shang-Chi as flex slots. I personally believe Carnage can be a flex slot. It's targeted at just decks that fill up your board. Shang-Chi, on the other hand, I do not believe is a flex slot. This is a very rewarding deck to learn and play. I do recommend it. Of course, you do have some issues with Sandman, but they're a little bit less pronounced than you might think, because if you expect a Sandman, you can sort of play your cards early. For example, if they're Sandmaning on 4 off of an Electro, you still have Mysterio into Hitmonkey. Those are pretty big units. And then you can say, soak with a Sunspot, play a Demon, then play America Chavez on the final turn. Like, it's not perfect, but you have game in a way that you generally do not against a Leech deck or the previous incarnation of the Thanos deck with Leech, Killmonger, Wave. Those are the cards that really beat this deck. I do think this deck might have a chance to shine. I do worry about the Sandman matchup. It's definitely something that we'll have to figure out on the fly, but I don't necessarily think it's nearly as bad as what used to be the Thanos Lockjaw matchup. So this is a deck that saw its worst matchup take a big hit here and definitely could be on the rise. Finally, we have what I consider to be one of the villains of the format, and this is going to be a bit of a theme here. There are a lot of villains in this format. This is the pay-to-win Galactus list that hybridizes a turn 6 Galactus with a turn 5 Galactus with a turn 4 Galactus. We can play all of them. One thing I really like about this, though, is the inclusion of Taskmaster. There are certainly some games where you end up doing something like Electro into Nimrod into Destroyer, and you're going to want to Taskmaster that Destroyer on the final turn. There's definitely a lot of play in this list that it does not exist in other Galactus lists. Now, of course, you do really want to be drawing cards. I am a little uncertain about the Yondu specifically, but I do like maybe sometimes you have the ability to like fill up a lane. I don't know how useful that is anymore. The Yondu is definitely the card I am the most suspect of here. I would think maybe it could be Psylocke, maybe it could be a bunch of cards. I don't know personally, but the general shell of Nimrod, Null, Galactus, where you have the ability to play as a turn 6 Galactus deck with Nimrod and Shuri. You have the ability to play as a Destroyer deck with the Nimrod. You have the ability to play as a turn 4 Galactus deck with Wave into Doc Ock, into Null. You can do a lot of different things. Of course, turn 5 Galactus deck, Electro, Doc Ock, Galactus, Null. You can play all the ways Galactus can play with this list, and I think that makes it the best Galactus list because it is the one that is the hardest to deal with. Another option you could put in here is Kang. I'm kind of a Kang believer in Galactus. I think he's just good. The more specific the counterplay you're looking for, the better he gets, and Galactus is looking for very specific counterplay. So I do think Kang over Yondu could be a viable swap here. I just felt like maybe we should put the version of the list that doesn't run the 6,000 token card on this video. Finally, I have two more speculative lists for you, just lists that I sort of cooked up in my head that I have not tested at all. Of course I haven't tested them. Right on patch day, right? But these are two lists that I just think maybe you want to dive into. So we have, first up is Leader Wave. This is just Doom Wave, but Leader's in it. Again, we talked about how Leader goes with Sandman. He goes even better with Wave because you can do Wave with She-Hulk. Obviously, Death Wave is another very plausible version of this that you could play. I tend to prefer the Doom Wave shells, but hey, your mileage may vary. In terms of flex slots, Maximus is not necessary. I brought him back into the list because you used to play him a lot because of the way Leader worked, and you'd be waving and you'd be restricting their play anyway. You have the Maximus to make sure you have a little extra points, and then, maybe Maximus doesn't work the same way he used to with Leader, where you just get everything that you gave them anyway. Obviously, Leader only copies one thing now, But I do think there might be a little bit of upside in just getting the absolute biggest unit that you can for your cost here. I'm interested to see how this ends up playing out. Obviously, it could be Polaris. Lord knows I'm a Polaris lover, but we'll see how it ends up playing out. I do like the inclusion of Zero for that Maximus, for that Lizard. It's just a card that is a 1/3. It generally curves out well. Things like that are generally pretty good. There's a lot of flex in the 3s that you can mess around with, but right now, this is just something I would be willing to try. And finally, I'm not sure if I mentioned 8 decks earlier. If I did, I'm sorry. It's actually only 7. I slammed Leader into Devil Dino because this used to be just the absolute turbo nuts. Devil Dino, in the event that Leader becomes a dominant force in the metagame, I'm not sure this will happen, but in the event that he does, being able to play asymmetrically is a really good way to combat Leader. So your ability to play asymmetrically, like if they copy your Devil Dino, but you have more cards in hand than them, your Devil Dino is going to be bigger than their Devil Dino. The same goes for Darkhawk. If they copy your Darkhawk and you have less cards in your deck than they have in theirs, your Darkhawk is going to be bigger than their Darkhawk. And so this was always a really nice way to break the symmetry here. Now, I do think the inclusion of Leader is a little bit iffy. He's currently in the Doctor Doom slot, so he's more of a tech card than anything else, right? Literally, this is the same list, just with Doctor Doom in it. It does enable you to make a pretty psycho play of playing Quinjet, Moon Girl, copying a Leader on 5, Leader on 6. That is rude. I don't know how good it is. It's definitely just something I wanted to investigate here. So if you liked these decks, make sure you drop a comment, talk to me about the deck, tell me which one your favorite is, drop those likes, do those things that make my dopamine chemicals go. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. As always, let me know how you feel, and I will see you in the next one. I'm KM Best. Thanks again.